that the murder rate is up in Canada since the Liberals took over by about 40%? Is it any wonder that the rape rate in Canada has doubled since the Liberals took over? People are not sent to jail very often, and when they are, they're not kept there very long. That's the simple gist of it.
You know, really, until Trudeau took office, the rate of crime and the rate of violent crime was on a slow, steady decline. There's a lot of reasons for that. One was demographics. The population as a whole was getting slightly older. And of course, crime is a young man's game, both in terms of perpetrators and victims. But to see that come undone is shocking. I mean, it's really the same thing in New York City. That city almost single-handedly was responsible for lowering the American crime rate. It was so criminal in the 1970s, but then Rudy Giuliani really made it the safest big city in America. And just that statistically changed the whole country. But then you had these woke mayors coming in and saying, well, we're not going to prosecute. I mean, in San Francisco, they're not going to prosecute theft under $950. You have corporations firing staff who dare to try and stop shoplifters. The staff want to stop, but they feel a moral repugnance. The companies fire them and call them racist or whatnot. Shops are closing in San Francisco, and I don't think it'll be long before they start closing in some neighborhoods in Canada. Let me ask you this, Lorne.
Several major hoteliers have moved out of downtown San Francisco, 3 that I can think of, because it's simply become too dangerous for their guests to walk around in the downtown area. And so guests are staying away. And so the hoteliers have pulled out. I mean, that's what happens when you follow these ridiculous progressive notions about what will stop crime. And you have to recall that, you and I have talked before about how often experts turn out to be wrong. They were wrong about a lot of the pandemic countermeasures, for instance. They are terribly wrong in this case, and we're seeing the evidence of it. So all of these liberal reforms were based on what experts told them. The best way to stop crime is to reintegrate the potential criminals into society as quickly as possible. No, you're releasing them. You're releasing the people who have shown themselves to be the most likely to commit crime. You're releasing those people into the general population. What in heaven's name do you think is going to happen?
Yeah, and by the way, if I know you've studied this too, but for years people have been concerned about what they phrase missing and murdered Indigenous women. Who killed these women? What happened to them? Well, the RCMP actually has a very high rate of solving those crimes. So it's actually not a mystery. About 85% solving, but the same is for white victims. And the answer is, and it's a terrible answer, which is why you don't hear the answer, but the RCMP themselves publish it. Most of the women who are violently assaulted or killed are victims of people they knew who had done it to them before. In many cases, a family member or a boyfriend. And the bail, you talked about how bail is so easy. It's even easier, and sentences are even more lenient if there's an Indigenous element to it. You get almost a racial discount. And this is done in the name of being progressive and healing. But if the primary victims of these Indigenous men on reserves are Indigenous women on reserves, you are sending the violent man right back into the household where he already attacked the woman. That's a shocking fact to hear, but it's the fact. And so the white judge feels very noble, but he just sentenced another Indigenous woman to be killed.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a lot of merit in what you say there. I mean, the James Lake Cree Nation multiple killings, the stabbings last year were perpetrated by someone who had been under mandatory early release from prison, in part because of what they call the Gladue principle, which is where judges have to discount the sentence of Indigenous criminals because they're Indigenous. It's presumed that they had a harder upbringing than non-Indigenous criminals, and so therefore they get a partial pass. You couldn't say they always get a free pass, but they get a partial pass. And That's exactly what's happening. I mean, we've seen that also in the United States, where there have been efforts made to release African American criminals earlier, or integrate them more, or be more lenient, and the recidivism rate, the repeat offense rate, is higher. One of the things that I came across, well, two things I think it would be of interest to your viewers that I came across yesterday when I was doing my research on the bail and parole fiasco. One was, since the Liberals have come to power, the percentage of gun crimes has doubled. And that's not people who are being convicted for unsafe storage or failing to renew their licenses, or some of those administrative laws that the Liberals created. That's not the crimes we're talking about. This is people who've pointed at guns in the commission of a crime, fired a gun in the commission of a crime, in some way or other used a gun to commit a crime. That has doubled, despite the assault weapons ban, the handgun ban, and all of the other restrictions that the Liberals have put on law-abiding gun owners. They were never the problem anyway. So what you've basically done is you've increased the likelihood people with violent records will be out on the street, and you've taken away guns from ordinary people. So what's going to happen? People who are out on the street on bail or early release know that they can use a gun, and nobody's going to have any ability to defend themselves. So that's why those instances have increased. But the other thing that was, I think, very telling, and it gets back to what you were talking about, Indigenous offenders. The murder rate among Indigenous Canadians is 7 times what the murder rate is among non-Indigenous Canadians. And that's significant, I think, because the murder rate among other minority Canadians, other visible minority Canadians, is only a fraction higher than it is among non-Indigenous, non-racialized Canadians. So if you have the murder rate, for instance, among Black Canadians is not that much. It is higher than among white Canadians, but it's not that much higher. But the murder rate among Indigenous Canadians is almost 7 times what it is among non-Indigenous Canadians. And so there's a problem there. And as you pointed out, most of those murders and crimes against Indigenous people are committed by Indigenous people. And that's where the Liberals, if they were interested in solving crime, should be focusing their efforts there. How come that happens? What is the reason for that? And let's try and help and stop that. But they don't. They go after law-abiding gun owners, and they release all sorts of violent people into the street. And yesterday, Prime Minister Trudeau was asked, well, is your new cabinet going to take on bail reform? And he said, well, yes, of course, we will do bail reform. We said we would. Now, their bail reforms, I think, will be largely useless. They're not going to lock up a lot more violent people awaiting trial than they are doing now. It's mostly for show. But he said, yes, of course we'll do bail reform. But this is about mental health support and dealing with social issues. So they have not absorbed any of the lessons from what these crime statistics show, because in their minds, being progressives, in their minds, they're always right. None of their theories are ever wrong. They may be just not implemented properly. So let's work harder to implement the ridiculous ideas that our experts have given us. I think that's where we're headed with this new cabinet.
Here's a clip of Trudeau saying exactly what you just described. Take a look.
The latest data from Statistics Canada shows an increase in violent crime in Canada. How are you going to ask your new minister to tackle this, and do you have any possible solutions?
We've been working with provinces across the country on bail reform. We've been working on strengthening the ways of supporting Canadians, because it is not right that in far too many of our cities we're seeing an uptick in violent crime. And there's all sorts of different factors that go into that. The need for bail reform is one of them. The challenges on mental health that have come out of the pandemic and these difficult years. These are all things we have to respond to. But it's not just about stepping up on the security side, although that is important and we're doing that. It's also about creating greater opportunities for youth to be part of community organizations and have the kind of mentorship and guidance that keeps them out of a life of gangs and crime. It's about making sure that we're investing in safer communities in all sorts of different ways, with better mental health supports, better community and frontline workers. It's more work on harm reduction in terms of the opioids epidemic that's devastating far too many communities across the country. We're going to continue to take an evidence-based approach that is there, is present, working with municipalities and provinces to keep our communities safe, to keep Canadians safe, because that's one of the fundamental jobs any government has.